Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Plotkin, and I'm the Head of Policy and Influence at the Florence Nightingale Foundation, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you today. Next slide, please. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time. So I'm going to start by handing over to my colleague, Raluca Oaten, who's going to spend around 15 minutes talking us through the findings from our preceptorship pulse check report. And then we're going to open it up to our fantastic panelists for their reflections and comments before we then open it up even more widely to all of you. Next slide, please.
And I think this is where I came in. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present the findings, implications, and recommendations of our recently published Preceptorship Pulse Check report. And firstly, we feel a brief background is really useful. This is our third national survey exploring the state of preceptorship provision and access, with the previous two surveys having been conducted in partnership with Unison and Nursing Times. We know that the initial findings revealed low and variable support. And also what we've seen over the three cycles of the report is that with the release of the NMC preceptorship principles, with the release of each nation-specific national preceptorship frameworks, as well as the Skills for Care workforce strategy for adult social care in England, we have seen signs of recovery. Access was steadily improving, yet it was still far from being universal. And so the first two surveys highlight a strong focus on the preceptee experience, but also revealed a clear need to better understand the preceptor experience, the preceptor readiness and their needs, which is something we have focused more on in this survey. To understand this overarching provision of preceptorship, we conducted a mixed method study combining quantitative and qualitative data collection. Between January and March of this year, we administered an online survey to students, early career registrants, preceptors, and preceptorship leads and champions. And this study included closed and open-ended questions designed to capture that experience, those perceptions, and the challenges relating to preceptorship delivery. And to supplement this survey, we have carried out 9 semi-structured interviews with preceptorship leads and subject matter experts, a roundtable discussion with 22 regional and national leads, a workshop with 11 nursing and midwifery leaders, and also a workshop with 78 students across all years. And all of this data was analysed descriptively and thematically. What we found from a demographic point of view, we had 870 responses, and the largest group of the respondents were nurses, 81%, followed by midwives and then nursing associates and dual registered professionals. And what we also know is that amongst those respondents, 76% of them were educated in the UK and 24% were internationally educated, which roughly matches the composition of the NMC register. We know that geographically 98% worked in England, with the remainder spread across the UK nations, and that respondents worked primarily in the NHS acute hospitals, the mental health services, community services. From a student cohort perspective, that cohort included student nurses, student midwives, and also student nursing associates. And what you need to sort of highlight is that those sections that you see, 1 to 4, were not mutually exclusive, or 2 to 4 really, were not mutually exclusive, as some respondents identified across multiple roles. And it's important to also acknowledge at this point the limitations in our survey sample, which was dominated by responses from England and acute setting, with only 1% from social care and 3% from primary care. And to help us better understand and reflect these underrepresented areas, we're really pleased to be joined on the panel by Gillian Knight from Wales, and then Claire, who's the National Preceptorship Lead for Nursing from Skills for Care. Firstly, the student perspective. We talked to students about knowledge and expectation, impact of preceptorship on employment choices, preferred programme components, and key areas of support needed. And for the purpose of this webinar, I will only focus on the first 2. When we assessed student knowledge of preceptorship, what we found is a considerable variation in awareness levels. 58% responded that they have moderate knowledge of preceptorship, but 34 indicated very little to no knowledge. Only 8% felt they had substantial knowledge. And our student workshop revealed that knowledge really increases with academic progression, with final year students demonstrating greater familiarity with preceptorship concepts compared to students in earlier years. But despite this variable knowledge, we know that 86% of respondents expect a structured preceptorship program upon qualification. And this is important because this expectation appears to be influencing their decision-making process around employment. Over our 3 survey cycles, we've observed notable shift in how preceptorship availability affects student preferences. With the 2021-2022, we had 54% indicated preceptorship would influence job acceptance. And the most recent one, we have 66%. So this is a 13% point increase. It is an upward trajectory that suggests preceptorship is increasingly viewed as an indicator of employer commitment to early career development. But although these findings are really encouraging, it is important to caveat them in the context of what we're hearing about the national job freeze and the challenges newly qualified practitioners face in securing those first roles. And with this limited job availability, choice of employment may be constrained, which obviously makes the recruitment more competitive. But what we've seen is this is all the more reason to invest in the high quality preceptorship, especially when we are operating within a stretched workforce and increased responsibilities, which often now fall also on the early career staff. Now, turning to our preceptees, so our early career, the survey provided really valuable insights into access to preceptorship, quality of their experience, and its impact on retention and motivation. And while we also gathered views on what makes a good preceptorship, on the key challenges, and the support needed from preceptors, today's focus will be on access, on quality, and on impact. From an access point of view, we have seen a huge improvement in preceptorship access compared to prior surveys. We know that 2024-2025 showed 91% of early career reported being offered a preceptorship program upon qualification. And this is an increase from 61% in 21-22, so a 30-point increase, which is a significant improvement. However, when we looked into the data, we also found that there is a clear disparity as 94% of UK-educated early career registrants received preceptorship offers compared to only 81% of internationally educated preceptees. This is a 13% gap, which indicates that internationally educated are 3 times as likely not to be offered preceptorship opportunities, despite actually potentially facing additional challenges in their transition to practice. When we looked into the data as a general as to why preceptorship has not been offered, what we found is, as a common explanation, was a lack of general provision, followed by a shortage of available preceptors. But notably, some reported that preceptorship was specifically not offered to internationally educated professionals, to those new to register, highlighting really a potential systemic barrier. And this is an area that we will be exploring further within FNF throughout this year. When we will be launching a work stream to understand internationally educated nurse and midwives barriers and enablers to remain in the workforce, but also to develop and occupy leadership positions. And also, we are again grateful to have Ariel on the panel discussion, and he will be sharing his learning expertise and experience within this area. Turning from access to quality, we found that early career respondents largely reported a positive experience of their preceptorship programs, highlighting its value in supporting transition and building that confidence. We know that a clear majority, which is 59%, who received the preceptorship program rated the quality as good and excellent, whilst 25% considered it average and 16% rated poor or very poor. What this says is there still remains a notable variation in the overall standard. But what we also found, if you look at the second graph on the right, that preceptorship significantly influences retention decisions. So it's a direct link. A good preceptorship will directly influence decision to stay, whereas a poor preceptorship program will directly influence decision to leave the organization. Moving on to our preceptors, and this, as I mentioned earlier, is a new category of respondents. Our preceptors talk to us about their experience and motivation, their preparedness and training received, and also systemic challenges. From our experience and motivation, we know that preceptors reported strong intrinsic motivation and real pride in their role, with many valuing the opportunity to support others and grow professionally themselves, despite also recognizing that their role often is being undervalued, inconsistently supported, and poorly defined. From a preparedness and training, I guess this is a really important part to pick up. We know that only 3% of preceptors felt extremely prepared for the role, while 30% felt slightly or not at all prepared. We know that training access really varied, and it was 52% had face-to-face training, 19% completed the national e-compendium, and 17% had no training. We also know that 12% were unsure whether any training was required. And that takes us also to those systemic challenges. And I'm sure it's not going to come as a surprise, but the most common challenge was balancing that clinical responsibilities with preceptorship, 49%, followed by time management, supporting struggling preceptees, and also meeting documentation requirements. From a readiness point of view, we know that our preceptors highlighted ways for better preparing, which include the top 5, having clearer role expectation, support from experienced preceptors, and training in giving feedback. And that's a really interesting quote. And after this webinar, we'll be sending the slides, so you'll be able to see that and read that in more detail. Our next group was those preceptor leads and champions, again, a new group that we looked at and we asked their expertise and experience. And we've heard from this group on capacity and commitment, on what impacts quality, on the priorities for improvement, and also on the future preceptorship programs. And I will be touching on those in turn. From a capacity and commitment, we know that only 46% of preceptorship leads said there were enough staff willing to be preceptors, with 40% saying no and 13% being unsure. And what this actually tells us is that there is inconsistent organizational and at time uncertain levels of readiness. We've also heard that preceptorship status varied, with 58% saying it is mandated and 31% confirming that chief nursing sponsorship, pointing to really a lack of visibility and accountability across many settings. And again, it will be interesting at this point during the panel discussion to hear from Gillian in Wales, where preceptorship is mandated. From barriers and priorities for improvement, we know that implementation barriers are significant and they can undermine the effectiveness of preceptorship and really that reach across the health and care settings. In the first graph, you will see that workforce pressures emerge as the overwhelming dominant barrier, with nearly 90% of respondents identifying this as a key obstacle. And this really reflects that reality. Preceptorship must compete with immediate clinical demands in increasing stretched health and care environments. We also know that the absence of protected time for preceptors represents the second most significant hurdle. And this suggests that even when willing preceptors are available, they really struggle to carve out dedicated time for meaningful engagement with preceptees. Respondents also identified improvements that can be grouped under 4 key domains: the structural support, the professional development, the policy, and the program quality. And again, that protected time comes up at 80%. What's the future vision from a preceptor lead and champion? Well, looking ahead, those respondents shared a clear vision for modern, high-quality preceptorship, and their top priorities were peer-to-peer learning and wellbeing support, each selected by 95%, followed by multidisciplinary learning, cross-cultural competence. There was also a strong interest in technology integration, virtual mentoring, and cross-organizational partnership, pointing to a desire for a more flexible, more inclusive, and digitally enabled approaches. Our report also sets out clear recommendations across several levels to ensure preceptorship is consistently delivered, valued, and sustained. And I'll go in turn. For the UK government and the Department of Health and Social Care, we recommended reaffirming national commitment by embedding preceptorship and encouraging employer-funded models in social care. Crucially, this must be backed by the ring-fenced funding to support protected time and digital infrastructure, and to be able to offer equitable access across professions and across regions. For NHS England, the focus is on delivering clear national standards through the preceptorship quality mark, setting out expectations around duration, protected time, and content, with specific adaptation for different care settings, including social care. And what we really heard from senior leaders in nursing social care, and they've emphasised to us, is that any national framework must be adapted to recognise that distinct operational realities of social care settings, particularly smaller providers who may lack that infrastructure, dedicated education time, and protected time arrangements that are more readily available in larger NHS organisations. Training, as I mentioned earlier, must also be standardised and strengthened with a national curriculum, annual refresher, training, better support for preceptors and champions. And we suggested that NHS England should also promote that digital transformation of preceptorship systems, ensuring platforms are co-designed, user-friendly and well supported. Finally, the quality mark must be used not just as an assurance tool, but as a driver for continuous improvement, really backed by audits, feedback and evidence of impact. Organisational leadership matters too. We recommend appointing a senior responsible officer at board level to champion preceptorship, but also whilst ensuring there is an equitable counterpart of an SRO in social care, where, as I said, often structures differ to NHS. At a local level, preceptorship leads and champions play a really pivotal role. We're calling on them to champion high quality implementation, promote that inclusive access, especially for internationally educated staff, and support the digital transition with practical guidance. For higher education institutions, we recommend integrating preceptorship awareness earlier in the curriculum and connecting the students with those leading preceptorship in practice, and we know work is already undergoing, helping to bridge the gap between education transition into workforce. In terms of getting involved, we have got an option of submitting a case study. So if you look in the report, there is a link where you can download a form. Please fill that form if you want to submit your case study, and send it over to policy at Florence Nightingale Foundation, and we'll be working with you to be able to shine a light on the exceptional work you do in your areas. And then also, please do sign up for FNF Updates and newsletter where you find more information about our work. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lisa.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Relika, for that. You covered a huge amount in a very, that was like the quickest I've ever heard us go through some of those findings. So please do all take your time with the report to fully digest its contents. Now we're going to join a panel. Do you have the panelists on the screen, or did we? Yep. There you go. So as you can see on the screen, we've assembled a really expert panel here to provide some reflections. And in thinking through who we wanted to invite, everybody here was invited because we've already had so many conversations with people, and we thought, who would know how to answer that question? Ariel, he would be the one who would know how to answer that question about what are we going to do to improve access for internationally educated, and the same with kind of everybody on the screen. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Elaine Robinson from the NMC, Karen Cam from NHSE, Gillian Knight, our DCNO from Wales, Claire Leanhowers from Skills for Care, and Ariel Linoda from the International Nurses and Midwives Diaspora Alliance. And so the way that this panel reflection is going to work is that I am going to pose a starter question for each panelist, which incorporates some of the questions that many of you submitted in advance. We kind of grouped them together in themes. And then after those reflections, we will open it up to all of you for some of your questions. So whilst panelists are talking, if you do have a question and you don't want to forget it, please do pop it into the chat, and my colleague Jane will help make sure that we get to it, or kind of raise your hand when the time comes. So I'm going to start with you, Elaine. So we heard from preceptors that role expectations in training can still feel very unclear. So is there anything that the NMC is exploring to help bring more clarity and visibility to preceptorship as a key part of early career support?
Hello, thank you for that. It's nice to be able to have a little think about this in advance. Um, at the moment, as you'll know, we've got the principles for preceptorship, and the principles are designed to be individual, to fit with, what the individual nurse or midwife or nurse and associate's learning needs are. And again, they are designed for newly qualified, but also it does state there that people new to role as well. So it may well be international nurses and midwives coming over, or people actually that are taking on particular post-registration roles that may be different as well. At the moment, our streams of work are around practice learning and the code and revalidation, so we haven't got a stream of work around updating preceptorship. But I imagine once practice learning and other things are done, then that will fall into place anyway, about how that fits. And certainly we can feed that back if, when significant work comes up and if feedback comes through that it might need to be aligned more to what comes out of our practice learning review for students as well. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Now I'll move to Karen from an NHS England perspective. So those of you who are following this closely will know that the NHS in England has been piloting the quality mark, which feels like a real opportunity to embed consistency in preceptorship and address some of the variability that we were hearing from the respondents. But we were just wondering, how is NHS England planning to support trusts, especially those facing resource pressures, with kind of the challenges that they're telling us they face, such as protected time, digital systems, and training, so that high quality delivery can really become the norm everywhere?
Sure, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So at NHSC, we're really committed to supporting preceptorship and organisations to achieve the national standards consistently. And we're working really closely with the National Multi-Professional Quality Mark team to review the evidence and the examples of best practice in achieving the standards. So one of the things that we're doing to support organisations is, for the last 3 years, we've held a national forum for midwifery preceptorship leads, and that is going to be expanded to all professions in the autumn. The forums are really useful, and in fact, it came up in the Florence Nightingale report that peer-to-peer learning was one of the ways that supports preceptorship. So the forums are great with peer-to-peer learning and support. There's real lived examples of how particular organisations have overcome challenges to meet the standards. And as I said, it will be open to all preceptorship leads, those who go to communities of practice, and anybody who is involved in delivering preceptorship. And we work together to share resources and find solutions. Specifically, though, you asked about 3 things. You asked about protected time. Now, we know this is one of the most important standards within nursing and midwifery preceptorship frameworks. We know that the preceptors who were surveyed reported nearly 90% felt this was one of the most key elements and enablers. So to enable this, organisations need to be really clear in their preceptorship policy. We have fantastic examples to share of rosters and planning of off-duty, which allows preceptor and preceptee to be on duty at the same time, allow them to have planning the off-duty for protected time, for progress meetings, learning and reflection. We've got some really good examples of this from various organisations, such as the Devon Partnership, which puts 20% of time for preceptees and preceptors together. And I thought it was interesting, in the Florence Nightingale report, it actually talked about protected time being vital breathing space. So it's valued by preceptees as well. As regarding digital systems, we've got lots of organisations who manage their preceptee data very well. Some of them manual systems, some of them online. For the quality mark, we are developing a central quality mark portal to make it very easy for organisations to submit applications when they're ready, to show that they're achieving all those elements in the standards to apply for the quality mark. And that's with our NHS internal TEL team. So it's work in progress, it's progressing well, and we hope that in the autumn, when everybody is the quality mark is open for everybody to apply, that portal will be ready. Regarding training, just quickly, Preceptor preparation, you've touched on formal Preceptor training and both in-house and the e-compendium. I think it's more than training, it's all about preparedness really, isn't it? It's about understanding the role and development. So we really suggest it's skills in people management, emotional intelligence, active listening, compassionate leadership. And although we haven't been prescriptive about what is in a preceptorship programme, I think as the forums develop, what is in the preceptorship training is becoming more important. It's rising to the top of the agenda. So I think the standards were initially developed to get rid of that variation for preceptees, and now we're realising that incredible role that preceptors are doing, and how we support them will be the work going forward. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Karen, for those reflections. Really good to hear about the portal that's going to be available for people, because I do know that that was something that did kind of come up again and again. And I love your point about the variability within preceptor training, because that was a surprising thing for us as well. And people saying that they want support with more and more of the same thing. So not so much about the program content for the preceptee, but actually the training content for the preceptor. So thank you for that. Now moving on to Gillian, who's going to give us a perspective from Wales, which I know also came up as we were having conversations as well, about the approach that Wales has taken. So we know that Wales has taken a mandated principles-based approach to preceptorship that still allows for that local flexibility. And from your experience, Gillian, what have been the benefits and challenges of making preceptorship a national requirement?
Thanks, Lisa. Before I go into it, I'm just going to briefly recap for Pranam Da. Good afternoon, everybody from Wales. Just briefly recap on the approach we've taken and why we've done it. So we commissioned a review back in 2022 with the aim of having this nationally consistent direction and policy position, but we broadened it. We put that position around professional career spanning support for our nursing workforce. And we did that in the form of preceptorship, supporting people through that transition phase, as we've discussed, and then also including a model of restorative clinical supervision to support registered nurses throughout the career. So we published that position statement, and we worked with organisations on a phased approach to implementation, recognising the extent. That was a year ago. That was last July. We got those phased implementation reports in, and we are currently back looking at key performance indicators against that Welsh Health Circular and that position we set. So I will put in the chat, Lisa, afterwards, just a link to our position for those that may not be familiar with it. But the question you asked was around benefiting mandating it. So I guess what I've done is broken this into three areas, or I'm going to add a fourth if that's okay. So the first one is the consistency of support. So by mandating, it ensures that all newly registrants across NHS Wales get a structured, equitable introduction to practice. And well, our plan is that it will reduce variation experience and help embed a shared understanding of professional expectations and standards. The second one is improved retention and confidence. So having a consistent framework supports these nurses through that really critical transition from student to registrant practitioner. And we know that this will, and your reports have demonstrated this, that this will help to improve confidence, competence, and hopefully retention is what we're looking for in this, especially in the context of the massive workforce pressures that we're experiencing continuously now. We don't talk about winter pressures anymore, do we? The third one is the cultural shift towards, I want to say, compassionate practice. So compassionate leadership is something that we very much underpin all aspects of practice in Wales, and embedding preceptorship within that broader framework of the restorative clinical supervision really does promote psychologically safe, reflective, compassionate workplace culture. And this aligns with our culture and our commitment within Welsh Government as well. And the fourth one I wasn't going to include, but I'm just going to mention, is the national infrastructure and accountability. So the reason I wasn't going to mention it is because we're now just back to looking at that. We have KPIs agreed, but we're looking at how we're going to collect and move that. But the requirement for organisations to submit their phased implementations and report updates to us does, in fact, absolutely help and enable that system-wide monitoring and improvement or will for us. So a couple of the challenges: variation in readiness, as I've kind of mentioned, is a key one for us. Resource and time constraints, which is something if we, and I've looked at time commitment, training, and to get all of our both supervisors and preceptors up to, and we have a year-long program of training to get everybody at the right level. So we cannot underestimate the resource and the time constraints, which is why we've got this phased approach. And the balancing flexibility. So while the principle-based approach allows for local tailoring, we haven't identified this yet, but we would not be terribly surprised, and there is a risk that too much variation in interpretation could dilute the consistency and the impact. So I'm going to leave it that one there, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. And did you say that you have a year-long training for the preceptors?
No, that's it. So when we start looking, so the preceptorship period, is the
Is a
up
year
to
long,
18
yeah.
months, but the training, if we were to get all of our preceptors trained, updated in a program, it would take us a year. So
right.
it's that resource implication.
Right, I see. Oh, thank you. That's really, really interesting to see, because I think that in some of the questions submitted as well, there's a lot of what do you think about mandation? What do you think about mandation? And lots of different opinions about, well, who would be mandating it, if it's organizational mandation versus if it's central mandation or CQC mandation, depending on where you're located in the system. So it's super interesting to hear the reflections from kind of 2 years on from the principle-based and restorative clinical supervision letter that I remember Sue Trenka sending around to the system about how's it going.
It's a year.
Is it only a year since the letter? So gosh, yeah.
We commissioned the work, in 2022. Yeah. So the work has been ongoing for longer, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Now moving on to Claire from Skills for Care. So we know social care settings face unique challenges in offering preceptorship. And in fact, we really struggled to even get a strong kind of social care sort of responses to this. But we know from speaking to social care leaders that there are specific and unique challenges for social care nurses. So what would make the biggest difference in helping small and medium providers to embed preceptorship support for early career staff in a way that works for their context?
Thanks, Lisa. So I think there's several elements to this, and I certainly won't have all the solutions. But I think one of the things that would make a big difference is that there's an understanding of where social care nurses and nursing associates are working. They are not working in large trusts. They are working often in independent, say, care homes, nursing homes. There's so many providers of social care throughout the UK, and specifically we work within England. So I think it's being mindful of that there is not that infrastructure in place that sometimes that does exist in the NHS. So I think for social care providers to develop preceptorship, that is a struggle in itself. So I think there's opportunities there in terms of developing that understanding within social care about why preceptorship's needed and how to develop a programme. One of the things we've done at Skills for Care is develop some national resources and support so that care providers can better understand on an organisational level what preceptorship is. What does it all mean? How do they implement it? How do they work within the principles of preceptorship that the NMC is supporting? And basically give them the support they need to develop those roles, preceptorship leads and preceptors. So one of the things that we're offering is that 3-hour workshop for preceptors in social care so that they can develop their understanding and their ability to take on that role. But I think the other part of it that's really needed is an understanding of those providers that are out there that have developed a preceptorship program. It's good, it's working within the principles. What they aren't often able to evidence is that they are working within the framework and able to meet the benchmark that's set potentially by an organisation that
that isn't social care. So it doesn't necessarily understand how they're operating and the difficulties within their structures, particularly their governance structures. So the requirement to have an SRO is a real challenge in social care. It's identifying, well, who's going to take on that role. You know, it's not a large trust. There's not those same reporting procedures that are in place. So I think it's understanding that that's a real challenge. The other element of it that I think social care providers struggle with is the need to offer an education program. Some of our smaller providers, they don't have education teams. So it's who's going to develop that program of education for them. So I think it's understanding that and understanding that the quality mark offers great opportunities to change that. So it's at pilot stage. Let's go back and look at, well, how does this become a very inclusive measure so that social care providers can actually meet that quality mark? And I think as it stands, they will still struggle to do so. They've already struggled to meet the benchmark. There's very few that are able to evidence that they're working within that framework. So I think that with the quality mark, what we don't want to do is set up social care to fail. They'll never be able to achieve it. They'll never be able to evidence that they have a quality preceptorship program. When they do have preceptorship and they are doing the best that they can, and they are working within those principles, it's just, are they matching what is the framework or the quality mark? And I think that's the challenge for social care. So I think let's use the quality mark, but let's make sure that it's inclusive and that social care stands a chance of being able to reach that standard. That's just my observations.
No, thank you, Claire. I mean, that does encapsulate what we have heard when we have reached out to social care, is the tremendous pride from the organizations that have achieved the interim quality mark, and then some of the concerns from the smaller ones that they feel potentially shut out from being able to have this recognition, but just incredible willingness to engage with it and to make it more kind of fit for their setting. And now, last but not least, in terms of our initial reflections from our panelists, it's over to Ariel. So this report shows that our internationally educated colleagues are still less likely to receive a preceptorship program. And, you know, when we got our sample, one of the things we were really pleased about was that it was representative of the proportion of internationally educated on our register. So we got a really robust sample from this group of people, which enabled us to actually look in further in their experience. And we know that there is this persistent access gap. So what can we do practically to make sure that this gap is closed?
Thank you very much, Lisa. The key is to focus on practical, inclusive actions that go beyond just offering preceptorship. We need to make sure that it is accessible, it is consistent, and it is culturally relevant. Sometimes line managers and clinical teams may not fully understand the value or the importance of tailored preceptorship for internationally educated workforce. So first, we need to embed internationally educated nurses, midwives, and allied health professionals specific preceptorship into the onboarding process from day one. That means not relying on start dates, aligning with a cohort, but offering a rolling access with flexible start points. Every clinician or clinical area must have a clinical practice educator responsible for the orientation, induction, onboarding, and preceptorship programs to ensure no one is left out. Second, we need to train our preceptors, as what other panelists mentioned already here. Preceptors, so that they understand the unique challenges that our internationally educated colleagues face, whether that's navigating a new healthcare system, cultural differences in communication and language, accent in particular, speed of speaking, idiomatic expressions, or even understanding the unwritten rules of the UK healthcare system. A culturally competent preceptor can make a massive difference in increasing or creating a psychological safety, fostering a non-judgmental environment where preceptists feel comfortable asking questions and even making mistakes sometimes and raising concerns. Third, we need to create opportunities for peer support and pastoral guidance, as what your report highlighted, not just clinical supervision. Some organizations are already using the body systems to support internationally educated nurses and midwives, which allow colleagues to share experiences and build confidence together. The first 6 months are crucial for internationally educated nurses, and I published an article published by the British Journal of Nursing in January 2024, experiences of internationally educated nurses who joined the NHS in England. Adaptation takes around 18 months, but maybe longer for some. They would benefit from a preceptor who really understands their own culture and helps them adapt to a UK way of life. And finally, we need to listen, gather regular feedback from our internationally educated colleagues about their experiences of preceptorship program and use that to co-design improvements, help make the support more meaningful and tailored. So finally, to summarize my point, a consistent access is essential, but it is quality, cultural sensitivity, and personalization of preceptorship that makes it meaningful. That's where we need to focus our efforts. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ariel. And I was struck when you were speaking by the fact that when we looked and examined the experiences of internationally educated colleagues more, and the ones especially who weren't offered a preceptorship program, we did notice that when we asked them, why weren't you offered this, they didn't necessarily say it's because I'm internationally educated, but they said things like, it's because of the start dates. I wasn't able to get in the cohort and things like that, which then point to some of the underlying things. But it just speaks to how scooping up those people will probably scoop up everybody. If we're targeting our internationally educated, we're probably going to get even more people who don't quite fit in to the system in the way that others do, or kind of non-traditional routes into the workplace. So thank you so much to our panelists for those initial reflections. So I'm now going to turn to all of you. First, I'll start with Jane to just see if there's questions from the chat that we want to pose to our panelists or didn't get a chance to speak. But if you do have a question as well, please do raise your hand and we'll come to you. But over to you, Jane, to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, there have been a few questions in the chat. Raluca's been responding to some. I think most have been covered. There was one about a difference between adult and paediatric preceptorship kind of programs and delivery, and the response to that is no, it didn't come out in this research, but there's already been a bit of chat about possibly in the next survey it's something to take forward. There is a question, I think, one that hasn't really been answered is whether AHPs were involved in this research. I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. So initially we did target nurses and midwives. We had a small AHP response rate and they were not our target audience with this, but a lot of people have said, as you know, we move to multi-professional frameworks, you really do need to include AHPs in future iterations, and we completely agree. We take the point. So we want to, as Raluca, I think, mentioned in the chat, we would love to do a fourth survey of this, but expand it to include AHPs. That would necessitate all of you on this call helping us get access to our AHP colleagues, because our alumni community and member community is just nurses and midwives, or more the majority nurses and midwives. So we would need all of you to help us reach the right people to make that happen. We've already been signposted to the HCPC, so we hope to start building those relationships with their regulator to make that happen.
And just another question in building on that, Lisa, was the independent sector involved in the research? Did you get any responses?
Yes, so we did get responses from the independent sector, but it was a minority of respondents. So the same thing, like we know that social care is a blind spot. We know that our devolved nations responses were too small for us to make any recommendations for them. So we are committed to working on that and working harder to reach those people. And the same thing with primary care as well. We know that we did not hear from primary care in the numbers that would allow us to say anything meaningful about that group.
Yeah, the only other question, there was a request to Karen to share some of the examples, and I think what we can do is put them in the email follow-up and also on the page we've shared with examples once we build that up a little bit more. Unless you want to say anything now, Karen, is that okay? Yeah, okay.
Right. Great. I can definitely turn to some of the questions that were submitted to us in advance. Here's one about a multi-professional, so relating to that AHP question. So in a multi-professional preceptorship program, can different professional groups have different core criteria? And I think that might be something that Karen might be able to speak to first.
Hello, thank you for that. So for the allied health professions, there is still a core criteria regardless of the unique profession within, I think there's 22 or 24 professions grouped together within the allied health professional groups. So yes, there's a set of core competencies and then there's a set of more profession specific as regards the quality mark.
Great. So and I think there are also some differences between nursing and midwifery, and are those being maintained as well? Yeah.
There are, and that it made me think when Claire was talking about the social care. So if we think about the nursing standards and midwifery standards, they were developed at different times. They are quite complementary to one another, but there are things that midwives do that nurses don't. There are things that nurses do that midwives don't. There are buddies in midwifery. There tend to be champions in nursing. I think some of the nuances is about the language we use, because basically this is about understanding the professional group that you're trying to represent and making sure they can achieve the quality mark in the language and terminology and infrastructure that they operate in. So the quality mark is not trying to shoehorn people into a particular way of working. It's just trying to recognise some of the truly brilliant preceptorship work that's going on out there already.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that. And I see that Jacqueline has her hand up. So over to you. Oh, no, there's a head. Your head is shaking. Is that a mistaken hand?
My mic wasn't enabled, so you'd shut me off.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Robinson-Rouse and I work in the London region on workforce improvement, but also I'm the regional lead for preceptorship. And we're doing a lot of great work, and we have done in the region around this. And one of the things that we keep hearing from our preceptorship leads and stakeholders is around the digitisation, which is meeting the national agenda. And for me, it isn't just around the digitisation of a quality mark, it's around the digitisation of the preceptee programmes, especially if we're going to be offering flexible programmes and trying to be more inclusive, where people will be flexibly going in between organisations or may even be doing part-time working. That is really important, that we have a way of tracking people. So for me, I can see you've put digital in but actually absolutely it would be great if we could all be lobbying for something around the digitizing and porting of preceptee programs, but also preceptor training and access to that, and then we'll have clear visibility. There is capability in the NHS of platforms that we're using for digital technology, and I think Karen touched on that around we're using that for other digital skills that are being used. So I think there's something around using a once approach that I think will be really valuable. That's my comment. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on if you've heard any work that's going on or any interest around that.
So really happy to thank you for that. I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to do the case study library is exactly because we kept getting questions like that. Do you know of, have you heard of anything? So that is one of the areas in our call for case studies, is to highlight people who are getting that right, because we did hear anecdotally, but I feel like we got from the data, this is a problem, and we need to know how to fix this. So I'd be keen for anybody here, we've got a huge group of expertise, not just amongst our panelists, if you know of anything or any good work going on, and we can work to share that. But I don't know if anyone of our panelists wanted to come in on any reflections.
Just on that point, we have got some examples in the region of that, but unfortunately they're paid. You have to pay for it. It's like it's a private provider. And actually we have got NHS systems that can have that capability that is free to access and use. And that to me is how can we work with our national colleagues to leverage that capability, because to me I think we've got some great examples of digital, but it's not freely available. It comes at a cost, and therefore that won't be available to everybody because some people do not have the financial envelope or the infrastructure to support that.
Oh, that's really interesting to know. Thank you. I think that sparked off a lot of comments in the chat about how it would be good to have a national take on standardized digital portfolio that can be adopted by organizations. Yeah, I could completely agree. It's a rich area for us to explore in terms of best practice moving forward. Are there any other questions that I've missed that have come through the chat, Jane?
There's a kind of comment and a question from Fernandez, building on the points from Ariel about will there be a separate mention of support around challenges faced by internationally educated nurses in the framework or in the requirement for preceptorship quality mark? That's just something to reflect on if anyone wants a quick response.
Probably Karen.
Yeah. I'll quickly respond. I mean, in the frameworks, you will notice it isn't just for newly qualified registrants. It's actually for anybody who's new to the register. So that could be a return to practice. It could be internationally educated. It could be somebody even, okay, they wouldn't come off the register for maternity leave, but you could also put a return to practice programme in for somebody following maternity leave. I think the most important thing around this support, whether you're internationally educated or whether you're educated here or whether you're returned to practice, is that individualised support package which is right for you. Because whether that is to do with a cultural thing or whether that's to do with a clinical thing that you need to learn, or whether that's to do with orientation or confidence building or competency building, it's all about it being completely personalised to that individual. And that's really what the gist of this is. It's about supporting that individual to reach their full potential and be a fantastic performing healthcare professional.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I think Gillian wanted to come in on this topic as well.
I did. Thanks, Lisa. Just building on what Karen was saying, it's really important that we have preceptors from all backgrounds representing the workforce that we have. And particularly the international nurses, they bring that lived experience and that cultural insight. And the type of thing we expect there is to have not only the more inclusive, safe environment for preceptees, especially those from diverse backgrounds and internationally educated, but really to help challenge unconscious bias, systematic inequalities, in the clinical settings, because we know that's a problem. So that's why we need to have, we need these preceptors to act as like visible out there role models on the ground, reinforcing the message that leadership, clinical excellence are attainable across the workforce. And I do feel that internationally educated nurses are really well positioned to do that, by identifying barriers and integrations that some people might overlook. Just wanted to add that in, Lisa. Thank you.
Oh, no, thanks, Gillian. And one of the things that did come out of the report was how can we use the preceptor role? How do we develop people? So it's not just the training, but then how do we have career pathways for people who take a clear interest in and excel at educating others? So what else can we do with this group of preceptors as well in terms of clinical education or in their own leadership? And how do we develop them and invest in them as leaders within their organization? Ariel.
Thank you. In similar vein, actually, there's a question from Louisa on the chat about recognition of prior experience and qualification. That is why I alluded to in my speech that the preceptorship, any intervention should be relevant tailored, personalized. Otherwise, we're wasting resources here and we are insulting people. That is why the role of clinical practice educators is very important, or managers, to sit down with this individual. And it must be, as what Karen alluded to, individualized. We need to understand the training needs of these people rather than giving a blanket treatment, because everyone is different.
Thank you. Thank you, Ariel. Any more questions from the floor? Jane, was there anything else that we missed in the chat?
There are a few questions. In the interest of time, I think there was one about, and again, a request for examples, which is maybe what people could share later in the case studies about, you know, lack of protected time was one of the barriers, but how to approach this with like ward leaders, they were named specifically as an example. So maybe anyone here has good examples of those, do either put in the chat or share with us in the case study group. And I'm just seeing as well, is there an F&F preceptorship support group? Not currently, but definitely that would be, we could reflect on. Then there was another question about the independent sector.
Just on this point,
again, we've touched on
Raluca,
that.
I didn't know if you wanted to come in on one of these points.
Not on one of those. I was just
Okay.
wondering whether Elaine and Claire might have a view on that prior learning and how that can be recognised from an NMC, but also from a social care perspective. And I know we've only got 4 minutes, so depending on how you feel.
I'm happy to take the question from that Karen's mentioned there that's come into the chat, actually, because I think that's really important. It's about, so Karen's asked, how can we ensure preceptorship quality standards are adopted in the independent sector? And I suppose that's where social care sits. I think it's the same issues that we mentioned earlier, Karen. So I think it's one issue is it's not widely adopted. So that's one thing. We've got to make sure that the independent sector is on board with offering preceptorship in the first place, and then making sure that they're aware of what a standard could be so that they're actually working within that. And I suppose that's where the quality mark comes in. It sets a standard. So it's just making sure that they're aware of that and they're on board with what's required in terms of that. And I suppose that's what I was saying earlier in terms of this is what it should look like. This is the gold standard. But is everybody able to achieve that to begin with? So it's just making sure that it is open in that way. But yeah, I'll come. Raluca, do you want to ask the other question? I suppose it was about those standards and things. I think there might be someone else who might better answer that than me.
Thank you, Claire. I think it was a question about recognition of prior learning and how do we make sure that we account for that.
Yeah, from our point of view, it's in the standards for the NMC principles of preceptorship. You know, you've got that preceptor empowerment, which is very, very much about making sure learning is individual, is adapted to the individual's needs. And that's where that recognition of prior learning will come in. And it's very much that developing a plan in partnership, isn't it? Just that we haven't got preceptors or organisations developing a standardized approach that actually isn't flexible to individual need. I know that, you know, we have a very wide high level principles of preceptorship at the NMC because they are there for everybody in individual and big organisations. So they do really need to be adapted alongside other plans and other pathways, but very, very much that's where that would come in for exactly, like Karen was saying, for nurses returning to practice as well, or nurses particularly maybe taking on a new role and a new part of the register as well as our newly qualified.
Oh, thank you, Elaine. I'll just come, is there one question in our last minute, or please know that you can continue to send us your queries. We will try to answer them as best as we can. I don't see any kind of last minute hands going up, and I am conscious that you're all very busy. So in terms of our next steps, so we think at the Florence Nightingale Foundation that this is really important, and it really, really matters that we get this right. Hence why this is our 3rd year running doing work around preceptorship. us, and we want to continue leading conversations around this critical issue. So following this session, we will send you an email about ways that you can get involved in that future work, which includes, as Raluca mentioned, submitting your case studies of best practice. But that is really just the beginning, because we want, as we said, to do this again, and we want to do it bigger, and we want to make sure that we involve everybody within our very diverse community, and including our AHP colleagues in this. Next slide. So before you do leave, we started off with this and we're going to end with this. So please do complete our Menti about future module topics, because that will really help us make sure that we're developing content that is going to be of most use to you. And I'll just end by saying a huge heartfelt thank you to all of our stellar panelists, and to all of you for attending. The slides will be circulated to you, and you will have access to the recording on the member portal. So thank you all, and I'll leave you to get on with your I'm very busy day. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.